各位觀眾大家好，歡迎收睇26分鐘見證實錄。2023年以嚟啊，卑詩省府推出包括10蚊1日托兒，幾次為幼兒教育工作者加薪等多項嘅措施，旨在係為本省嘅學齡前兒童家庭提供更加可負擔嘅托兒環境。政策實施之後啊，卑詩省嘅托兒現狀係咪切實咁得到改善呢？省府嘅多番努力係咪真係惠及到廣大真正有托兒需求嘅家庭呢？我哋一齊去了解一下。
Do you think like it's easy to find a daycare for?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. It's very difficult.
如果你的薪酬跟你的付出没有办法成正比的话，那很难让一个人就是长期的留在一个幼儿园里面。
我們就是經營幼兒園的目前呢最大的挑戰，主要還是在這個就是選址。
我知道呢度嘅daycare 係好缺嘅，好需要人嘅，咁所以就過咗嚟啦。
We do have more work to do, but I feel good about the pieces that we put in place.
對於目前所處嘅托兒環境，有大溫地區嘅家庭覺得係一件令佢哋煩惱嘅問題。
Do you think like it's easy to find a daycare for?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. It's very difficult.
We inquired last year, and it takes like 4 years and 6 months to do that. So basically, it's not a walk-in or a really accessible daycare center over here.
What about the price?
The price is just quite not reasonable at all. It's some kind of higher price.
即係個 waitlist 我諗2年到啦，即係睇下係邊度咯。即係有啲如果私人嗰啲或者會容易啲入咯，但係就 public 嗰啲同埋佢政府 subsidize 嗰啲咧就要等耐啲咯。
出生大概我記得好像是6個月前我就把它在 waitlist 上面了，然後真正從排 waitlist 到它上，大概花了2年半的時間。
而對於省府推出嘅10蚊1日托兒計劃，有家長就表示知道呢一個計劃，但係好難享受到呢一個福利。
佢翻緊嗰啲係$10 a day 嗰啲，即係10蚊1日嗰啲，即係我哋入到一個嗰啲咯，但係就都要等好耐先入到，同埋唔係好多間有呢個 benefit。
$10 daycare is very cheap and then it's very good, but we cannot put in the waiting list. So
It's closing.
It's closing.
Yeah.
Waiting list is closing, so it's sometimes very hard to.
We can't
Yeah.
resist.
近年嚟，卑詩省府加大咗托兒補助力度，並且擴大咗補助範圍。但係就仍然有唔少家長抱怨托兒服務不可及。對此，2023年5月，由獨立數據研究機構加拿大另類政策研究中心高級經濟師 David McDonald 發表嘅一份報告中就指出，隨住全加拿大實施每日10蚊嘅托兒制度，其中一個主要嘅困難就係根本冇足夠嘅托兒場所滿足需求。而報告中亦都提出咗托兒沙漠嘅概念。
It's looking at the availability of licensed childcare spaces by postal code. And so what it attempts to do is compare the number of kids that live in a postal code compared to the number of licensed childcare spaces that they might be using, and then determining which one of those postal codes doesn't seem to have very many spaces compared to the number of kids that live there. So in general, for the public school system, we try to locate schools where kids live to ensure they don't have to go that far to get to a school. And so we're applying the same approach here, but to childcare spaces to determine how many kids live close to childcare spaces. And if we find big disparities, so if you find a postal code where there are more than 3 children per licensed space, then we call that a childcare desert. So it's an area where there are lots of kids, but not a lot of spaces for them to use if they're looking for licensed childcare.
該報告顯示，卑詩省有64%嘅學齡前兒童處於托兒沙漠之中，而喺卑詩嘅農村以及偏遠地區，呢一個數字更加係達到60%至到80%左右。
So at present, there's about 80,000 full-time licensed childcare spaces in the province of British Columbia. and about 250,000 children of the age where they would use a childcare space. And so there's a fairly big gap there, about 4 times more children than spaces. And so there's a big discrepancy there. As I said earlier, it's not as bad in larger cities, but worse outside of those bigger cities, where you've got people, postal codes with under 100,000 people in those areas. And so in terms of the demand, in terms of how many new spaces are required, that's not something that this report calculated. But certainly within the Canadian context, it is possible to get much more childcare availability closer to where kids live. If we look at places like Prince Edward Island or Quebec, where, even in rural areas, you're looking at 15% of kids living in childcare deserts. That would be a vast improvement if BC was anywhere near what we're seeing in places like Quebec or Prince Edward Island.
David 指出，除咗托兒學位嘅嚴重短缺之外，本省唔同嘅托兒機構之間其實費用亦都存在巨大嘅差異。
So there's quite a gap now, and the gap is growing as a result of the new federal and provincial programs to reduce fees. Nonprofits are more likely to participate in fee reduction programs generally. And one of the big pushes towards more $10 a day spaces saw a lot of uptake, particularly in nonprofits, particularly in the city of Vancouver. And so in the city of Vancouver, the spread has become much larger now. The average fee for a for-profit now is 230% higher than a nonprofit in the city of Vancouver. And that's in large part because of the uptake for $10 a days among the nonprofits. It's still quite large in other cities like Richmond, but not quite as large. It's over 100% in Richmond. So for-profits charging 100% more than nonprofits. Again, this is related to the fact that nonprofits are just more likely to participate in fee reduction programs.
佢指出，要解決本省嘅托兒危機，任重而道遠，降低托兒費用只係其中一方面嘅問題。咁而關鍵嘅就係要創造更多嘅托兒名額，以滿足目前嘅托兒需求人數。
There's 2 big complaints that parents have, well, prior to this new national program. One is that fees are high, and 2 is that wait lists are long. The fees part is being addressed. So we are seeing real measurable progress in terms of reducing fees across the country. The fees and those fee decreases are going to continue until we get to $10 a day in 2025-26. And so on that front, there's a lot of progress being made in terms of reducing fees. The real issue now, I think, is going to turn to the creation of new spaces. So to ensure that not only are there lower fees, but you can actually get one of those lower fee spaces. That's going to become harder unless there's a big push to build new spaces. That, frankly, is the harder of these 2 issues, because reducing fees is about just transferring money. Creating new spaces is about building new spaces, to be sure, but also ensuring you've got the staff to staff them. And that is going to be one of the big bottlenecks. There are people who do want to work as ECEs and childcare centers. Unfortunately, they don't last very long there because, it's difficult work and the pay is low. And so retention and training of new staff is going to be one of the big challenges towards building out the system so that everybody can access these much lower fees.
對於本省目前嘅托兒狀況，卑詩省長尹大衛亦都喺早前同華裔媒體嘅圓桌會議上作出回應。佢表示，省府清楚認識到托兒問題嘅重要性，正係不遺餘力咁試圖化解目前嘅托兒難題。
The childcare issue is so important for so many people. One of the big reasons why I believe that British Columbia showed such success after the pandemic and economic recovery, we saw that our economic recovery was fastest among women in Canada. We think that the childcare initiatives that we put in place are the reason why we saw that kind of economic growth and return to work, in particular of women. There are 2 components to childcare that we're working on right now. One is before and after school care for kids that are in school. Kids that are before school age, that 0 to 4 age, is so important that they have childcare. We've been in our own government buildings building childcare space with BC housing buildings and publicly funded government housing buildings, building childcare space into those buildings. School boards, when we're building new schools, we're building childcare spaces into the schools as well. We're encouraging cities, when they're approving new buildings, to work with developers to build childcare spaces into the buildings as well. And when we put the Ministry of Education and Childcare together, it was to recognize that that this is going to be ultimately part of the public school system as a whole. So that's where we're ultimately working to using these school sites. So we've been, in some cases, building freestanding childcare.
尹大衛直言，解決托兒危機係一個長遠目標，需要一個過程，唔可以話一步登天。不過省府有信心逐步改善現狀。
Our biggest challenge, frankly, has been around the staff, around the workers to be able to run these sites, because we're raising our expectations of their training and background, so that we know that kids are safe and stimulated when they're at childcare, that they're developing and learning skills. And so we've expanded our bursary programs. We're expanding our credential recognition of childcare workers that have backgrounds in other places in the world, and we're supporting with reduced tuition increased seats, childcare training. We do have more work to do, but I feel good about the pieces that we've put in place.
卑詩省對於托兒補助力度嘅提高令到本省嘅托兒需求不斷增加，亦都加速咗好多托兒機構嘅擴張。咁佢哋會遇到邊一啲嘅難題呢？本省嘅幼兒教育從業員又正係面對邊一啲嘅困境呢？我哋下一次翻嚟再睇。歡迎翻嚟節目時間。卑詩省府嘅數據顯示未來10年本省將會出現超過9000個幼兒教育崗位嘅空缺。咁雖然省府持續推出激勵政策，旨在吸納更多嘅人才進入幼兒教育嘅行業。但係與此同時，有幼兒教育從業員就表示佢哋不斷咁面臨更多嘅挑戰。卑詩省持牌幼兒教師係凌斌，從事幼兒教育工作已經係10幾年啦。佢表示自己當年係出於對小朋友嘅熱愛而進入咗幼兒教育嘅行業，但佢發現呢一個係一個留唔住人才嘅行業。
其實幼教的工作量其實都相對來說還是比較大，然後工作時長也比較長。那如果你的薪酬跟你的付出沒有辦法成正比的話，那很難讓一個人就是長期的留在一個幼兒園裡面。如果單只是某一類的幼兒園，它的這個待遇不好，或者說工作量很大，或者僱主的這個苛刻來，他流失，他可能是流向了另外的幼兒園，那整體行業內還可能是會。還是有那麼多老師在，對不對？那最終他們為什麼沒有繼續從事這個行業？我覺得更多的原因還是因為是工資，薪酬太低造成的。尤其是在溫哥華，不管是房價還是生活成本，都是相對來說相對高昂的。所以幼教老師，在溫哥華的這個薪酬，我覺得是沒有辦法很好的負擔他們的生活質量的。
而對於幼兒教育工作者嘅薪金問題，啱啱調任兒童及家庭發展廳長嘅前卑詩兒童保育省務廳長駱惠斯就表示，對於幼兒教育工作者嘅支持係解決托兒危機嘅關鍵。
We often talk about childcare spaces, but there is not really such a thing as a childcare space. We build the infrastructure, but it really is the educators that provide that quality care and connection. And so they are absolutely at the heart of everything that we do in our childcare BC plan. So you mentioned shortage. We have expanded seats at post-secondary institutions. That's been really important. Supported students with bursaries, and investing in supporting the educators that are in the sector by increasing their wages, which we've done 4 times now.
而對於省府嘅幾次加薪，業內人士就指出呢啲福利並冇完全落實喺教師身上。
就12月份開始，每個老師持EC證書的老師，可以每個小時多拿，在你這個薪酬的基礎上，政府會給到6塊錢的補助，每個小時有6塊錢的補助。但是，行業內呢，其實，比如說這個錢是給到老師的，可能呢，那你僱主在僱主方看來，你可以多拿6塊錢，他可能同時就會降低你原來的薪酬。 所以这个也是一个行业里面有时候会遇到的一个对幼教老师来说遇到的一个瓶颈。那他可能为了移民的目的或者其他的目的，可能短暂的选择隐忍，那最终这些不好的现象都会造成幼教工作者的流失。
本省面臨巨大嘅幼兒教育人才短缺，但係有人就因為海外資歷認證而遭遇到重重障礙，冇辦法進入到呢一個行業。原香港註冊幼教老師胡恩晴就表示，佢喺香港讀完4年嘅幼教專業課程，畢業之後就喺當地嘅托兒機構做咗3年嘅幼兒教育工作。2023年中旬嚟到溫哥華，佢花咗大半年時間進行海外資歷認證程序，仍然未能夠順利換取本地 ECE 牌照。
覺得好 confuse 啦，明明你哋，即係我知道呢度嘅daycare 係好缺嘅，好需要人嘅，咁所以就過咗嚟啦，就諗住睇下即係有冇啲可以發展嘅空間嘅，即係其實我本身都係睇住咁樣，所以過咗嚟卑詩省呢度嘅，但係過到嚟去到真係去整呢個牌照嘅時候，就發現都好多比起其他地方更加多嘅嘢要做啦，都好 confuse 嘅，同埋就係好似佢哋個空缺已經大到係已經係你有牌我就做，我就俾你做㗎啦嗰一種嘅感覺，因為即係講翻頭先嗰個經驗啦，咁其實佢都係見到我有經驗，跟住係爭個牌啫喎，就已經好急不及待咁樣 send 咗個 email 嚟。但係最後尾都係做唔到，咁都會覺得好奇怪嘅。
對此，駱惠詩回應話，省府正係大力引進海外幼兒教育人才，以填補目前嘅職位空缺。
To your question about foreign trained early childhood educators, we have opened up the pathways for immigration through the provincial nominee program for early childhood educators. And that's been really positive and really productive so far. And as we are across government looking at opportunities to recognize foreign credentials and to support qualified quality educators that can provide that care and connection to our youngest. So that's work that we are taking on training, on recruitment, on retention, and as we are across government in looking for those opportunities to recognize credentials and make sure that we bring and support educators here to BC.
對此，係凌斌指出，省府為幼兒教育從業員大開移民綠燈，卻係造成咗行業內更多嘅亂象。
現在其實幼教行業其實算是一個比較流行的比較熱門的移民行業。因為呢，它這個是鼓勵你來做幼教嘛，因為它這個入門的門檻比較低，所以很多人會進入這個幼教的行業。但是呢，他的目的是为了移民。可能当他拿到身份以后，他可能在这个幼儿园做担保，然后工作2年或者3年，他拿到身份以后呢，他可能就会离开，因为他的本身的目的是为了移民，而不是为了真正做这个幼教的行业。所以你看，这个就会造成就是说，他做完了2-3年，他可能就永久的离开了这个行业。有些人是为了移民，那么他给他的工资可能会较这个平均的薪资更低，因为他知道他的目的是为了移民。然后呢，那他在这个过程中，也会被打压，然后或者说就是让他干更多的活，在这个其實相當於你已經有了這個身份以後的這個工作量，那麼對老師的這個身心健康也是很不利的。
除咗幼兒教育工作者遇到樽頸位之外，托兒機構亦都面臨唔少挑戰。大溫地區非牟利托兒服務機構負責人黃小寶喺大溫地區經營兒童日托中心已經有20年啦。佢表示，面對目前托兒短缺嘅問題，佢亦都想辦法開多幾間嘅日托中心，以緩解社區嘅托兒壓力。但係要揾到同時符合市府同衛生部門規定嘅托兒機構創辦地點，十分困難。
我们就是经营幼儿园的，目前呢最大的挑战，主要还是在这个就是选址，我们找地方太难了，然后呢，其实呢，我觉得市里边有很多，也有很多的就是一些，比如说他们市里边能够有的地方，如果说他们能够优先给我们这种非牟利机构，或者说是开办幼儿园的这些大型机构，都是为了社区嘛。如果他们能够帮助到我们的话， 提供给我们一些我们一样的是租金啊什么这些肯定也不会少，只是说我们现在是找地方太难找了找不到如果说他们能够幫助到我們，當然是最好的啦。
佢指出，佢花咗8年時間，先至喺列治文揾到一個合適嘅地點。咁租好場地之後，就開始申請審批開辦托兒場所。之後，佢花咗將近2年嘅時間，仲係未能夠完成審批流程。咁佢亦都因此遇到咗嚟自租金等各方面嘅壓力。佢試圖向政府部門尋求幫助，但係都係冇結果。
大概1-2個月以前吧，我參加過一個高桂林市舉辦的一個活動，就是有關幼兒園開辦幼兒園的這個，當時他也把省政府的一些官員，就是主管 daycare 的這些官員叫過來，然後我又留了有一些就是他們主管的那個聯繫的方式 email 什麼的，他跟我當時在現場還說了，說哎讓我說我需要幫助。然後尤其是經濟方面的，我不是說是找政府去要這個錢，但是呢，就是我現在審批比較慢，急忙拿不到執照，我就是經濟方面我會存在一些問題的。然後我就說看能不能申請政府的那個叫capital funding 或者就你開辦新幼兒園的這個 funding， 它是 open 的但是呢，就是我們需要一些指引，因為我看那個網站還看的雲裡霧裡都不知道怎麼辦。然後呢，你要去請會計師幫你做的話，會計師也需要時間，人家也要你交費其實主要的資料還是我們自己要去提供的。那麼我就給他發了 email 了，但是就是石沉大海，這都過去可能1-2個月了，也沒有人跟我有任何的回音聯繫。
佢指出，本省冇一個統一嘅創辦托兒中心嘅標準，每個市政府同各區衛生嘅部門條件都唔一樣，甚至年份唔一樣，流程都會存在巨大差異。
申請 daycare 的整個程序，每一個城市都有每個城市的規定，基本上它都有一個比較明確的一個 procedure 一個程序，但是問題是在審批的過程中，它沒有一個時間點。沒有說是time slot，就你多長時間你就得要做，就是什麼事情你得做完。比如說你 residential house 裏邊，像 Burnaby 這邊，我最快的1個月就批了執照了。這幾年了，相反的，我是第一個幼兒園1個月就批了執照了。同樣的事情，基本上是同樣的就是同樣的那個 situation，同樣的格局，基本上都是一樣的嘛。第一個就是這是14年前吧。我開的第一個 daycare， 1個月就批了。那現在開到現在呢，就是這2年開的，基本上都是6個月左右，甚至6個月以上。所以就是有時候這還算好了，就是你還知道他6個月基本上能給你批。但是那個列治文這個大型項目呢，就是現在已經是差不多明年3月份，馬上就2年了。我交房租已經交2年了，所以。那現在咱還不知道呢，正在裝修呢。
就等於說它的流程是很清晰的，但是它的審批的這個時效是完全沒有保障。
完全沒有保證。
對此，前卑詩兒童保育省務廳長駱惠斯亦都作出咗回應。
We're absolutely committed to building more childcare facilities. Since we formed government, we've been taking steps in this direction, and we've now funded 30,000 new childcare spaces. And that's working with partners, whether they're not-for-profits, indigenous governments, local governments, organizations really of all kinds that are looking to build and develop childcare. And we are seeing the outcomes of that. Just a couple months ago, I visited a new childcare center that was built at the Kelowna airport, for example. On that same visit, there's 600 new childcare spaces on school grounds in Kelowna, for example. And so we're seeing that really all over the province of our new spaces funding being used to build childcare where families need it, in community, at workplaces, and on school grounds. That funding remains open and continue to encourage our partners to connect with us, to work with us to access that funding and to build childcare in BC community.
好啦，今集嘅節目時間就差唔多啦。咁如果觀眾對我哋嘅節目有啲乜嘢意見嘅話，係好歡迎大家以電郵嘅方式同我哋聯絡㗎。我哋嘅電郵地址係mag26@fairchildtv.com。
咁如果觀眾咧想上網重溫翻今集節目，亦都可以上到去我哋嘅網站3W.fairchildtv.com， 點擊節目重溫一欄就可以睇得翻㗎啦。晚安。